Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We got Dr. C. Carlos is in the house, which is always good to have you back. Thank you so much. And of
Thank
course,
you.
as always, hanging out in his potty room.
Good to see you, buddy.
Before we go anywhere or too far, I want to make sure that everybody is liking and subscribing and notifying themselves of the podcast whenever it kicks in, which is every day. So make sure you're subscribed, up to date, good to go, so that we can get into the conversations. And hopefully, maybe one day I won't have to say that. But wow, that is a full coffee, man. Holy jeez.
That's after a few sips, man. It
I was
was
thinking.
crazy walking it in here.
Well, I have a topic. Is there anything though that you guys have on the top of your head? Anything that you want to bring up, throw to the discussion beforehand?
Not me.
No,
I'm sure
nothing?
something is going to pop up. I'm sure as we get
Guaranteed.
started, it
Perfect,
always
yeah.
pops up.
I'm quite surprised it hasn't started already. We're kind of 30 seconds late to the subject that we didn't know we were going to talk about.
This is why I am in charge, I guess. I'm the one pressing all the buttons. So everybody follow me. So what I want to talk about today, combative stress interpretation. And the reason I wanted to get into this is actually it goes into originally we had we're gonna have Dr. Gino on here as well, but he is not feeling well. So I was hoping we could have a couple of doctors let them talk about it. But unfortunately he's sick. So we have the reason I wanted to get into this is that Shaun and I were talking about this a little while ago. Carl, what's up? Good to see you, man. I'm gonna call you later today. We got to hook up for coffee at some point. The reason I want to talk about this is Shaun and I were talking a little while ago about the difference between like trauma bonding and shared hardship, right? Because you go through basic training, which can be technically traumatic, right? You're completely shifting your entire culture and the way you live and the way you do things into a completely new way of doing things while under stress constantly. And then you bond through that. And I think it'll apply later on into how this applies to combative stress interpretation. But is that technically trauma bonding? Or is that just like shared hardship where you come together? Would you know?
Well, trauma bonding is a very interesting thing. Warriors will tend to have it, and warriors can be in a lot of different ways. We see it in MMA, we see it in the UFC, how they bond after a fight most of the time. But most of the time they will. But in combat, I have noticed that we saw that with the Band of Brothers. I think it was a series a long time ago on cable. I don't watch TV, so I have no idea anymore. I can't remember. But I know with talking to over, I don't know now, I think over 100 soft guys, it's been fascinating to see the bond that they have. I mean, one of the stories that comes to mind is a Green Beret that told me he got called by another Green Beret who was having trouble. It was about 2 a.m. And he was having some really bad thoughts. You can kind of take it that way, as you know, where you're going to go. And so this particular Green Beret, I don't know if they want to name names, so I'm not going to name their names, but we'll just say John said that he told Bob that I'll be there and I'll be there. So I'm coming over. I didn't realize it was 4.5 hours away. But he went there. He went there at 2:30 in the morning, got there at 7 and spent the rest of the day. That's hard to find even in regular friendships. So something happens out there, and I think it's because of the unique experiences and the stress levels, of course, as well, that unite these individuals, but they know nobody else understands that world. This is one of the issues with the soft community and mental health sometimes, is because a lot of mental health professionals have no clue. And it's not a knock against them, it's just really don't understand it. It's a world that you just can't read about. You can't watch Black Hawk Down and movies like that and try to understand it. It's just so unique, the experiences, the adrenaline rush that they have. I never try, even though I've know dozens who are friends now and I've interviewed 100. I don't act like I know their world. I don't. I may understand it better than the average Joe, but still, it's nothing I can even fathom in my mind. So I think, yeah, you have that unique situation that does allow them to bond. And we see it a lot in athletes, and I don't mean to compare that combat to sports, but there is some little bit of similarity in that world.
Shaun, you got any thoughts on trauma bonding while you're taking a big sip?
Well, I was just thinking not anything in respect to building this out or whatever. I was curious how many we could never know how many therapists are combat veterans or special operators who understand that feeling, that we'll call it that bonding, where a person will drive 4.5 hours away at all night to get to help a friend. I wonder how many therapists are also SOF or former SOF. Have you any idea?
I don't know that number. That's a good question. I have no idea. Military wise, there are, I would assume, several hundred at least. I know that we have one in the class right now. I'm going to black out for a second, but we have one in the class that right now that's about, I think he's a former Marine. I've had a couple of Navy SEALs in the past. We engage here. Those are the ones that I know, at least from my personal experience, which is a very limited sample population. But they do understand a lot better. Now, the Navy SEAL that I knew that I had in the class, it was interesting to hear him because he was suffering through PTSD as well. But he's going for that community. I know the Delta Force guy, he's not a therapist, but he's a big proponent of mental health. And they actually, I think, created a program to help mental health professionals be more astute. And it's Tom Satterley. I forgot what the name of his operation something. Do you know him, Shaun? Looks like you might know him.
I recognize the name, but I'm trying to recall what he's involved in, but I do know the name and I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I'll look it up on he's on Instagram. He was a Delta Force guy. He was in Black Hawk Down itself, actually.
Oh, wow.
Maybe that's why I know his name.
Yeah, super nice guy. His wife is great too. And they're working on a foundation. There it is.
Is it All Secure Foundation?
That's it. Yep.
Oh,
there we go.
I'm going to reach out to him, see if we can get him on the collective.
Cool, man.
Oh, you definitely should. Yeah.
Well, that's good because that's another fascinating thread as part of the overall conversations that I love having. So your data set is actually larger than my data set. I don't know anyone who's in the therapy game that has any special operations experience. And so you know more than I do, as per usual. This is how my life runs. And so
me too.
What you've kind of casually already stated your casual observations on the difference that you could maybe loosely inferred as a delta between a standard issue therapist and then a special operations former serving therapist. So what do you think would make it give them that extra little bit of secret sauce or that little bit of extra hook to be able to help someone? Or is there nothing that you could call out as kind of unique or special?
I think the key, one of the main factors would be the similarity of experiences. So what I'm referring to, we see this a lot in the drug addiction world. You'll see a lot of places that'll want somebody who's recovered from an addiction. And I guess not to call it soft community and addiction, but it's a similar vein in the sense of I want somebody who understands what I went through kind of mentality. And I think that's what they have is they know the training, they know how difficult it is. They know the challenges of being out there. This is not easy. They know that things don't go right all the time and how you have to think about it. They know the stress of not being home. When I talk to the Delta guys, when I do my podcast, and I don't mean to shout it out here, but when I do the podcast, I try to do a different bent, which is usually the psychological bent about these individuals. And I learn about them. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of them have, like we talked about before, Shaun, too, is cognitive flexibility. They have that ability to see things in different ways, to get out of problems. And I think that's actually a great thing and also could be a detriment sometimes, because when you have a psychiatric disorder like a PTSD, you feel flustered that you can't get out of it, that you can't do something about it when you're so used to being able to get out of every other mess. It's in life. And now all of a sudden you got this own mess that you can't seem to solve. And that becomes more of a challenge. And I think they can relate to that. And one of the biggest things with mental health professions, and I always tell my students, which is similar to dating in a way, when you first go on that date, you got a wall between you, and you're trying to reduce that wall to get to know each other. The more you get to know each other, the higher that trust level goes and the lower that wall comes between you. And it's the same thing with therapy, but it starts off a lot easier if the other person already has an idea. The last thing anybody wants to hear in the military world or the law enforcement world is, why did you have to draw your weapon? why did you have to shoot, right? These are some of the things that people sometimes will say when they don't understand that community well.
There's also I think, at least I know of a few, not just soft, but former military that have become psychologists, psychiatrists, and there's a different air to them, right? Like you can just walking in the room, there's an attachment there. Like you feel like you're with another troop. It doesn't feel like you're with a psychologist. You know what I mean? Like there's no, it's not really like a professional barrier. There is one, but it doesn't feel that way. From what I know from the people that I know, and I could definitely see where soft would be a whole nother level of that. Where if you were former special operations and then became a psychologist, there would be a lot less description. And I know from my time dealing with my psychologist, there were lots of times where I would say something and she'd be like, what is that? And then I'd have to explain it, which kind of derails the process, right? You're not actually getting through it because you have to stop every once and explain it. My doc was really good, though. I only ever had to explain anything once. So unfortunately for other docs, there's times like my first doc, I had to explain stuff over and over and over again. We spent a lot more time me just going through pieces of an friggin' you know what I'm talking about, the shortening of words. There we go.
Oh, the acronyms.
Yeah. There we go. I was thinking anagrams for some reason. I don't know why. But the question that I wanted to get into in terms of, trauma bonding, it's kind of a negative thing, right? Like when you are talking about people bonding over trauma, usually it's thought of as a negative thing. But within the military, it is a very positive team building kind of thing. Is there a difference between the way it's done within the military versus trauma bonding you would see, say, at like an AA meeting or something where it's a addiction-related trauma bonding?
Yeah, it really depends on the intention of the bond. And obviously, sometimes it's conscious, sometimes it's unconscious. But if the bonding is natural in your support system to each other, that's different than being codependent on another person. So that could be an issue there. And you got to remember, too, there's good stresses and bad stresses. There's bonding even in traumatic events for people. War-torn countries, they're going to have bonds. The tragedy of 9/11, people who lived through that bonded if they were together in there. And they saved somebody if they were engaged in some kind of escape and they were all together. Mass shootings, people are going to bond a lot of times through that. A homicide detective could be actually pretty interesting for your show. I interviewed him, Moses, but he bonds with the families of the victims, and he worked the child unit. So he worked with a lot of these children who got murdered. And if you ever understood, homicide detectives was really a different world because they bond with their victims' families, which is very unusual for cops because they don't do that because they're patrolling. So it's a very different world than a cop compared to a homicide detective. And unfortunately, this little girl who was murdered, sexually assaulted and murdered, had the same birthday he had. So now he celebrates her birthday with her family for the last 8 years after her death. But it's still powerful for him. I mean, when I had him talk to the class, I mean, he still got teary-eyed.
No doubt. That's a challenging, to say the least, on how to manage that in a effective way. Shaun,
now I do have a thought or a question. It's not a hard question. It's more of a, well, we'll just see where it goes. So, as I was listening, I was thinking, like, why is that? Why would the homicide division be more engaged in the life of the victims, or more deeply involved in the fabric of society, versus the street cop, the line duty officer, who doesn't have the time to get deeply involved in the family? He or she is too busy running from catastrophe to catastrophe to catastrophe every 20 minutes. And so homicide takes the time to understand the fullness of the problem, and then is responsible to strip away the layers to get to the bottom of the problem, much like a therapist to some degree. Now, what I'm curious about or more fascinated about, I suppose, is going back to what we were talking about previously, the special operations therapist, we'll call it, who has had some previous SOF experience and now they're a therapist. What I see happening in this example is a homicide detective needs to connect with the family, just like we all need to connect with a therapist, just like we all need to connect as people. It's connecting is different than just writing a ticket. Connecting means you have to care enough about the person to ask them all the right questions and get to know them a little more soulfully. And I suspect that's why this individual is doing his birthdays with another family, because he's soulfully connected with them. And it just doesn't happen that often in the normative world. But it happens in special circumstances where someone is pushed outside of their norm and starts connecting on a level that just isn't surface. And so it's curious. The curious moment to me is if I was to step into a therapist's office with SOF experience, we'd be connecting right away. It would take away years of work. And so who on earth has taken the time to write the manual that's called How to Connect to a Human Being Better? Because, man, it would expedite a whole lot of stuff is what I'm thinking.
I'm gonna, if it's okay, Chance, I guess I'll expand a little bit, because there's a couple of things that popped up in my mind. And one question I want to ask both of you, for if I can, real quick, just to curious to see what the Gen Pop has, and you're not even the Gen Pop in a sense, but what do you think is the number one thing for a therapist to have success? And that's even harder to define, but a success with a client of theirs to help them. What is the number one thing you think it is? Is it the skill set, or is it something else? I'm curious to see what you guys think, because I know the students don't usually know when they begin, but I don't know what the general public thinks about.
What do you think, Shaun?
For me, it can be called a therapist. It can be called the grocery checkout clerk. It can be called anything. It's just be cool. Like you've got to be cool. And
what does that mean to you, to be cool?
Right. So cool can mean many things in many circumstances. But if you can kind of be cool like Fonzie, then we're going to get along. But if I walk into an office or into wherever, it doesn't matter, and I'm meeting someone for the first time and they're a bit standoffish, or they have a professional shield in front of them, or they are arm's distance from what we're about to do, just an air of separation, we'll call it. It's going to be a long day, because the moment that I step in, I know what I'm stepping into within a second. And if in that first second someone is given off the air of separation, it could go on for years. So a second into the room, I'm looking to turn on my heel and walk out.
That's a great one. I was thinking along the lines of I don't know, the words that came to my mind were aggressive patience. You have to be able to be aggressive enough to draw out the information, right? And like actually engage with the person directly and speak to them clearly, but patient enough to allow them to speak and allow them to work through the emotions as well. So at least for my doc, that's the way I refer to it, because she would engage the conversation directly, aggressively, and engage me to do things or talk about certain things that I didn't want to. But through that, she was patient enough to let me get there in order to actually go through. Carl, another vet actually here, he says trust and compassion as well. So, those are all great things. If you can have all those together in one, you got a good doc, I think. But I personally, I think that's the biggest one, is because you have to be able to push people, but at the same time, allow them to work at their own time. So
the number one thing we teach is therapeutic alliance. That's the thing, which is kind of everything that you guys mentioned, Carl, as well, is really being able to develop that trust with that client. Because if they don't trust you, they're not sharing squat with you. Mm-hmm. So obviously Chance trusts his client or his doctor. And if you don't, it won't work. So one of the things I would try to tell them is You can be Freud's cousin. It doesn't matter if you're Freud's grandchild. You're not going to get through if you can't develop the trust with this person, and it takes time to get to know them. And one of the things that's interesting, we had a presentation a couple nights ago to the students about war and trauma, and I shared a video of a Green Beret who lost his leg with an IED. He was going to clear a room, stepped on the IED, and lost his left leg. But then he made a comment at the very end of his talk about this. He was talking for about 8 minutes at this particular range about how everything's led up to this moment. And then he said, I saw my left leg and I grabbed my foot. And you're not supposed to be able to grab it the way I grabbed it, because my left foot was pointing behind and hitting my butt. So I guess you could say I kicked my own ass, was his comment. But that's when I stopped the video and explained to the students, this is important, because he's making light of something that it's overwhelmingly stressful. His coping mechanisms went way too much here, and the brain defended him in a way that he felt comfortable, which was humor. And obviously, it's actually kind of fascinating because the brain also dulled the pain for him to be able to process things. He was still looking around to see if he was safe, if anybody else was hurt, because he didn't even realize his leg was gone at the moment yet. And he was trying to think about what else was going on. So you can see the amazing ability of his brain and the cognitive flexibility of a soft guy. But that moment was really important for them, because I told them you have to understand that mindset. Because if you don't understand the mindset and you challenge it, they know that you don't know. And so for me, I always tell them the best thing to do if you want to work with the military, get to know individuals in the military, get to know the lingo. You don't have to know every MOS out there, but at least know what MOS means. Maybe try to get to know a little bit. Don't act like you know everything, but at least get to know them, their world, what they see, how they view things. Because it's very different in certain situations like that. Because a lot of people will look at that and go, what's he laughing about? I don't get this. But those moments are overwhelming.
Yeah.
I think there is kind of almost a necessity, I believe, out in the professional therapy world to when working with the military anyway, to just create 3 or 4 boxes. Maybe it's 5 or 6. I don't know. We'll call it 1 or 2. Create some boxes of categories. And at least one of those categories would be SOF. And then the other category could be everyone else. But if you want to refine everyone else into other little subcategories, that'd be great as well. Because here's what I'm thinking. If you want to understand how to make a guy like me better, let me know that I've got a puzzle in front of me that I've got to solve. And then I'll go solve it. That's true. And if you want to make that process happen quicker, tell me that I can't do it by the end of the year.
That's what I was going to say.
and I'll try to have it done before Christmas. And so it's understanding the client, or it's understanding the category. No one needs to know acronyms. They just need to know what the central button is for that category. And for us, it's tell me it's a puzzle, tell me it's hard, and tell me I can't have it fixed by ... I'll get to work. And so that's us, or me, or friends like me, I guess. But then there's all those other categories that have their own central buttons. And I think it's for any therapist who works with the military to understand 3 or 4 or 5 different categories, understand what that big red button looks like, and then punch it pretty quickly within the first, hi, how you doing? Real nice to meet you. My name's Shaun. I'm your therapist. I'm cool as Fonzie. So, I
think that's a big part of it, is actually not just the knowing what button to push, but being able to push back. Right. My first doc was very passive, very, I would say, analytical, almost to a fault, like deep into the the education system, and it really felt like he was trying to write another book rather than actually help me at the time. But anytime I would come up with something like, civilians are just garbage, and blah, 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 all my anger and stuff, and he'd be like, oh, that's understandable. I could see where you would, and it was like, is it really that understandable? Right? Whereas the doc that I have now that I've been with for years, the moment I'd make a something like that, she'd be like, are you sure about that? Isn't your wife a civilian? I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, I guess, like, she's pretty cool too, right? And then, well, what about your son? Well, I guess, yeah, he's a civilian. Oh, well, then not all, right? And so the ability to push back, especially against military people, I think is a key, because we'll deflect and use humor and talk about basically anything else other than the stuff we don't want to talk about because we can. But in order to completely wipe that deflection off the board and be like, no, we're going to talk about that, and be not quite target fixated, but direct enough for our liking, I guess. Shaun, you got
that is important, but it ain't going to work if I don't respect you.
True. That's a good point. Yeah.
And so you can line up all the therapists in the world, and if they take the wrong approach with me within the first 10 seconds, you could have written the book, and I don't care.
That's not a good point.
If I don't respect you, I ain't interested. Mm-hmm. And so there's certain ways to not command respect, but to earn my respect within a second of me walking into the room. But you got to be cool. You can't be a goof. Mm-hmm. You could be Freud, and I ain't gonna listen to you if you're coming across like, if I walk into Freud's office and he's sitting at his desk writing on a piece of paper, and as I approach him, he gives me one of these, a cursory glance, and then gets back to finishing his sentence. You're done, Freud. You're bounced. I don't care. If you disrespect me, my time, my presence, my moment, that I'm here to play with you, you're here to play with me, we're here to figure some things out. If you can't give me a nod when I walk into the room and even just give me one of these, I'll just be a minute. We're done. Because it's disrespectful and you're not gaining my trust.
That's a very good point. I like that. The fact that this is another point that we make snap decisions, right? We're trained to be able to make snap decisions. So if as a therapist, you're not playing the game up to our standards, I guess, right off the bat, it's done. Bye-bye. We're moving on to the next one. So it can be challenging because we're ready to either move forward or move somewhere else. So
well, it happens even before you step into an office, I feel. Yeah. And so the more refined you are in the process of getting a feel or a read on the situation, I get reads pretty quickly. Maybe that's a detriment. I don't know. But before I step into an office, I've already got a read because I understand the parking. Like, oh, what a gong show. And now I'm walking down the hallway to the office, and there's a mop, leaning against the wall. There's overflowing garbage waiting to be picked up. What a gong show. Now I'm in to see the executive assistant or the secretary. He or she is giving me he'll be right with you, and then get right back to Wordle or whatever. Gong show. And so now the door opens, and maybe the therapist of the day says, come on in. So tell me a little bit about your Shaun, is it? You're gone. Gong show after gong show after gong show. He's halfway or she's halfway through a sentence, and I'm done. It's because my reads have built it up to a situation where I feel that you don't respect my time because you're not being professional.
That's interesting. Shaun taking me way back in the nostalgia time here with Fonzie on the Gong Show.
Yeah, for sure, man. Why not?
I don't know how many people even remember these guys, but I love that. It's kind of fun. All right, Gong Show, that's right.
Yeah, but the hilarious part is, pal, that we can connect on that.
Mm-hmm, that's right.
And so it's all about connecting, and a cool person will figure out really quick how to connect with another person, even if they're not cool. There's a way to do it. And it shouldn't just be a passive process where if you're trying to connect with someone, you just kind of think, it'll eventually happen. Maybe by the end of today, we'll have connected. And I'm not sure how we connected, but I think maybe we'll try. I'm right into the game right away. I'm trying to figure out how to connect within seconds, even though I am not it's not my capacity to do that. That's just what I do. I'm looking to connect with the person.
Do you think that is do you think that's more of a social issue to actually connect with one another, or do you think it's like a lack of experience? Because when I was talking with James earlier, was the fact that we were saying as a society, as a culture, we've kind of lost the ability to communicate with one another. We don't really sit down and have these conversations that are, you know, open and have the ability to become a really in-depth conversation where people can be vulnerable and trust one another and actually engage in that type of conversation. Have you seen it at all in the students that you're teaching that they have a difficulty connecting to people versus 10, 20 years ago?
Well, that I don't. That's a good question. I can't compare it generationally. But I can tell you a couple of things that popped up. One, I want to commend you, because one of the things you did that a lot of people don't do is if you see one therapist you don't like, then they say the whole industry is out the window. And at least you went and continued on. That's overgeneralization, right? And that's one of the things that I think the therapist is doing with you right now is a technique called cognitive behavioral therapy, which she is. It's a critical thinking type of form of theory. So she's listening to what they would call cognitive distortions, overgeneralizations, magnification of problems, rationalizations, things of that are causing distress and impairing your ability to be happier and have developed relationships. I don't know if the therapists today are less apt. There's a lot of an older crowd coming into therapy. Again, it's usually a group that wants to connect with people. They try to. Sometimes they get intimidated by certain individuals because of their background. So that could be an issue. Shaun made some interesting points in regards to trust, because I know one of the books that helped me initially years ago, and you probably heard of it too, is the Dale Carnegie book, How to Influence and Win People. It was a great book. It was a simple book, right? Just talk about them. What's everybody like to talk about? Themselves. One of the things I thought was one of the key things I always tell my students is the session starts, which Shaun alluded to earlier. The session starts the minute that person meets you and you see them. They're walking, how they shake your hand, what they're doing. That's when the session starts for that therapist. You start learning what's going on. When the person sits down and you start filling out some of the information that you have to, right, in the history, it isn't simply asking, hey, Shaun, where do you live? Oh, you live. How long have you lived there? Oh, you just moved there 6 months ago. How do you like it? As I'm filling in the details, I'm gathering information quickly about Shaun. What do you think it's different about that, Shaun, from where you lived before? Are the people different? How he responds to that, if he tells me the people are nicer where I was before, tells me something. It's important for him how the people are. If he tells me something like the food sucks here, okay, so he's not concerned something else is missing. So he's concerned about the food here. We'll figure something else out. But those are things that I would start taking notes of and listening to what's salient in his mind at that point. If I ask about, siblings, do you have any siblings? If he says yes, I'm listening to how that yes sounds. Yeah, I have an older brother. Okay, we got something going on there. Maybe we'll explore that a little later and find out what's going on with the older brother. It may be nothing. It may be a history of issues. And maybe last week the older brother did something you don't like. I don't know. But these are things you have to be attuned with. And emotional intelligence, which is the reading of body language and understanding emotions of the other person, is crucial. And it's a skill that gets developed over time. I've taught that a while back. Used to teach a lot of body language and statement analysis. And when you're looking at people and they're talking to you, you want to pick up on cues. So if the person tells you, I asked them about their father, and all of a sudden now their leg moves up and down, or it was moving up and down the whole time, but now it stops and becomes an anomaly and goes away from the baseline, I know something's going on. Doesn't mean it's child abuse necessarily. It could be the argument they had last week, or they didn't want to do something for, who knows? But I know something's going on. So I have to explore that later to see if there's anything there or not. And that's what it takes time. Like for you, Chance, when you're with your therapist, you can kind of see that they're gauging, they know how to push you enough where you say, you don't say buzz off, I'm out of here. And you might even say that, because everybody has to remember when you go to therapy, this is not the easiest thing to do, is to tell somebody you really don't know about your deepest, darkest fears. You may have shame, you may have guilt, whatever it is. That's not easy just to tell somebody, no matter a therapist or not. And that takes time to develop that trust with that individual, so you can tell them, and you can say, this person really does care about me. And that's not easy to get.
very true. I was thinking how the connections that you can make, especially with a therapist, they can be really deep and lasting, but they're also very easy to make it very surface level, right? And I've heard this from many people who have attended therapy of like, oh, I couldn't tell my therapist about that. And I'd be like, why? That's what they're there for. Like that's the whole point. But I think again, a lot of people aren't making that connection. They're not taking the time to find the right doc in order to do it. And the reason that I actually went to multiple doctors was I actually saw this first doctor for over a year or just about a year. And I was just getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And I was talking to a friend of mine. He's like, you do know you can see whoever you want, right? It's like, what? Oh, okay. And I immediately started looking for specialists. And I found my doc who does equine therapy, and working with the horses was the thing that made me make massive strides in my recovery. So I think it's surprising to me that people are, I can't say surprising, it is disconcerting, I guess, that others out there that are going to therapy aren't actually taking the time to find the right person. And it's do you think there's anything that we could do maybe as a community to help that, or do you think as doctors would be able to do? Shaun, you got something?
Yeah, you didn't know how.
That's true.
Of course.
Yeah.
How could you? And by the way, my thought is this. And I'm curious about your thoughts, Dr. Carlos, about SOF versus, we'll call it, the regular military, because here's how I see it. In my military career, it was predominantly spent observing people. All my entire career trajectory was that. I spent more time looking through a 10-power sniper scope at people than most people have looked at people. I've just studied people a long time. And then being a high-performance race coach for 15 years and et cetera, teaching and all of that good stuff, I've spent a lot of time staring at people, thinking about people, watching that knee twitch or not. Mm-hmm. And so here's my thought. Because of all of that, when I walk into a place, I'm studying you more than you're studying me. Whereas Chance Burles never learned how to study. He never was on the same career trajectory. He's never spent the time observing men walk up and down a dusty field for hour after hour, year after year. He just hasn't had the eyeballs on the target long enough to understand how targets react in all circumstances. And so he's a bit of a newbie in studying humans, whereas I am not. So when I walk into a place, within a second, I'm getting a read. I don't have to spend a year with a person to understand that they ain't good to go. So I'm bouncing really quick. Whereas a lot of people out there, I just feel, and I might be wrong, that they haven't spent enough time understanding how other humans work in order to assess the other human that's supposed to be working with them.
No, that's a great point, because soft guys do have a high emotional intelligence. They're able to read individuals. And there's certain individuals in therapy, I got to be careful how I phrase this, because I don't want, it's not a comparison, but they have similar qualities in regards to reading other people, and therapists have encountered this issue. Is individuals that are psychopaths will tend to read people extremely well. Soft people can read people well too. Cops can read people well too. So these are individuals that are done who can do that. And it's not for every therapist. And again, not every therapist can do it as well as others. Everybody just depends on the years of experience and what you're tough. Another group that really challenged me were CIA. They were very difficult, especially the recruiters, because they were able to read people very, very well. I was profiled by one guy, and I was still stunned in 20 minutes how well he read me. So he did a really nice job on that. And my game is to understand that they're reading me as I'm reading them. The only catch is, and you probably understand this too, there has to come a point. I guess I can use you if you want. If you don't like it, just let me know. But Shaun has to come to the point where he realizes, I got to let go. Okay, I trust this person enough. I can't keep reading them. Because if I keep doing that, I'm not going to get any better here either. Because I'm just busy reading this guy all the entire time. And I'm reading you. And I'm reading you for a different reason. I'm not reading you for necessarily trust all the time. I'm reading you to find out what's bothering you and how is it affecting you and how can we help. For instance, when I use techniques to look at body language, interrogators will use it to look for deception. I'm looking for deception for a different reason, not to convict somebody, but to understand that they're trying to hide something because it hurts. That's what I'm looking for. Why are they not telling me what's going on? Maybe you heard this before, maybe you haven't. I don't know. Maybe therapists have told you. I don't know. Maybe you've done it yourself. They don't always tell you everything initially. There are some people that vomit it all out and tell you immediately what's going on. Others don't. They delay it. And then later on, about 2 sessions or 3, you're thinking to yourself, why didn't you tell me that in the beginning? Wow, this took like 3 hours to get to. But as you get experience, you realize it wasn't easy. They don't trust you enough. It's painful. It's shameful. So when I'm reading the body language, I'm thinking there's more to this story. I'm going to have to wait for it. I'm going to have to find out how I can access it in an interesting way to not offend them. I don't know if I used the Dante's thing or not. Did I use the Dante's thing on the last show?
I don't think so.
You guys read the Dante, the Divine Comedies?
Yep.
Okay, so if you read, thank God, no, a lot of people don't read that. But if you read Divine Comedy, remember he goes through hell?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is what this is how I associate a lot of people who suffer through trauma. They're going to have to go through hell, but they need somebody to help them, which is Virgil in this case, as they go through the different levels of hell, right? The little cantos. And they get to the one place where there's a door that you can't go into. Remember that? They got the guard out there, the sentry that's protecting it. Those are the deeper, darker sides that we don't. Whether it's sex abuse, a severe trauma that you saw something, whatever it may be, that's the place where we have to really kick in. I always tell people there's 3 things that people mostly need to be healthy again mentally a lot of times is, one is coping skills, which is hopefully what we can provide the client, right? How to deal with things, just like the therapist was doing with you, Chance, right? Mm-hmm. How to look at things differently and expand your view a little bit and look at the alternatives like you would do. Number 2 is resources, which today we have more than we did, but not everywhere has the same amount of resources in the country or countries. And then the third one is the toughest one, which is a support system. Do you have a real support system? This isn't the buddy that you're going to watch boxing with. This isn't the buddy that you're not going to share stuff with. This is the buddy you goof around with. This is the buddy that you can tell stuff that you might not even tell your parents or siblings. You might not have told anybody. And this is a person, you know, if you do tell them that, they're not going to drop you like a bad habit. They're going to look at you and say, it's okay. Whether I've been there or not, it doesn't matter to me, but I want to hear your side. And if you don't have that, that's tough. Mm-hmm. And a lot of individuals that struggle with psychiatric disorders, a lot of times don't. They don't have anybody to go to. They can't even go to their parents for whatever reasons. Maybe the parents themselves are the problem. Maybe their family's the problem. Whatever it is. And that becomes very difficult. So it isn't only the therapist who does a lot of work. It's getting other people to come in to participate, finding those resources, finding that support system to help you out. So again, back to Shaun's question, I kind of digressed a little bit too far, but back to Shaun's question about the emotional intelligence, it's really, you have to come to the point, both the client and the therapist has to come to a point where they understand, okay, we're done reading. Let's get to business now and figure it out. And hopefully they pass the test. But, you know, Shaun made the point too, and so did you, Chance. Sometimes it doesn't work out. That's okay. You move on to somebody else. I tell the therapist the same thing. If you're not clicking, and you can see you're just not really getting anywhere, you're doing nobody any favors by sticking around. You can try to refer them out and see what happens. That's usually the way that can go, because you're not doing anybody any favors if you're sitting there and trying to force something that's not going to work.
Yeah. Shaun, you got a point? You look like you're...
I do. Just real brief. Maybe part of the problem, and maybe this isn't part of the problem. Maybe it's not a problem, but maybe it would be helpful if everyone in the game, on the client side and on the therapy side, or on the client side and professional side, maybe if everyone was super clear that there's actually 2 things happening in parallel. You walk through the door and your job is to figure out how to trust the person in front of you. The other person's job is to figure you out. And maybe the roles have been muddied over time, because I've never heard anyone clearly state that your job as a veteran is to sit down, get a read on this person, and see if you can spend a year with them. Do you trust him? Do you like them? Do they smell bad? You shouldn't be thinking about they smell bad 4 weeks from now. You got to think about all these things as a long-term relationship. And maybe things are going a little sideways there. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, it does take a dance, and you have to see if you're interested in that person in that way and be able to communicate with them. Again, you're doing nobody any favors. If you're a client, you're not doing yourself any favors if you're staying with the person that you don't really like to even see.
Yeah.
It doesn't doing anything. And it is hard to decipher because I know these are a lot of generalities because it really depends on the individual psychiatric disorders. There are more severe ones than others, and every psychiatric disorder is on a continuum. So it really depends on how severe it is. But if you can able to, how would you say, discriminate between what is something you just don't click with the therapist or I just don't want to share with anybody. If you can discriminate that line, that becomes helpful too, because you also don't want to get in the habit of, I'm not talking to Dr. Jones, he doesn't, Dr. Bird's off the wall, the Dr. Taylor, everybody's nuts. I'm out of here. After a while, you get nothing. Then you have to kind of look at back and say, is it me? Or is it all these psychologists? And, Shaun made a good point earlier too. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So sometimes you don't even know if you're doing that or not, or if you even have the abilities to do certain things, go to other people and things like that. You're not alone on that one, Chance. I mean, that's a really big thing. I heard that constantly where people say, "Oh, I saw this therapist, and then the therapy isn't for me." Like, what? That's like telling me, "Oh, I met this American," which I used to get all the time. I met Americans are crazy. What American did you meet? Oh, this person over here. Where were they? L.A. What part of L.A.? This part of L.A. Do you know those other Americans like in Iowa? It's like,
yeah. You mean Bob from Canada? Oh yeah, I know Bob from Canada. Totally. Yeah.
Everybody's the same, right?
Right.
Like, what in the world are you talking about? Canadians are what?
Yeah.
It's like, actually, I have a good friend from Canada. I just talked to yesterday, Matt, and he was talking about the same exact thing. Everybody just throws all the Canadians. All Canadians are the nicest people, Like, look at Bill Burr's comment. He made some comment about maple leaves or something, maple sauce or something. I don't know what he was talking about, but you can't overgeneralize. And the same thing you can't do with therapists. You can't just say they're all the same. Therapy doesn't work. I've had a couple military guys that they were interesting because they told me therapy doesn't work, and they had 3 or 4 therapists, and that was interesting. So it's either them not wanting to confront, or the therapist just either maybe it doesn't work. And look, I'm not stupid enough to say it's the only answer. Equine therapy is a great alternative. Exercise is something people keep dropping the ball, never mentioning. Fitness and nutrition, huge benefits. Is it going to cure schizophrenia? No. Is it going to cure an adjustment disorder because something happened, you lost your job or a family member? It won't cure it, but it'll help you a hell of a lot more to deal with it. You get a lot of endorphins are released. So there's things you can do outside of just talk therapy. Taking walks in the green grass has been shown to help people. Going to the ocean, to the beach, things of that nature, reading, meditating, a lot of stuff like that can really be beneficial. So it's not just us, that's for sure.
Yeah. Added tools for the toolbox, right? More things you have that you can draw from, the better.
Absolutely.
One of the funny things is you brought up Divine Comedy. It was one of the horses that I work with on a regular basis. His name is Dante. He's a big saddlebred, and he's got a big white cross on his forehead. And, it's just too perfect. One of the things working with him that happened quite a bit was, I'd be sitting there brushing him down or doing one of the maintenance things that you do for horses, right? And the doc would be there, and she'd be asking me questions about some of the topics that were bothering me. And this is what I love about horses, is the fact that as soon as I started, I was getting a physiological reaction. Even before I recognized I was getting a physiological reaction to what I was talking about, the horse kicked in immediately and would either lean on me or bite my elbow or engage me in some way to remind me, hey man, you're right here. You're not back there. That's one of the reasons why I love equine therapy, is because they can recognize that long before you can. And then the more you do it, the quicker you can pick it up on yourself. And then you start to self-regulate rather than relying on the herd to regulate for you.
It's like a biofeedback mechanism.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're just awesome in general.
but just hard to put on your wrist, and they're actually quite expensive. So there's that.
There is. Although I mean, you can put a horse on your wrist, but it's not going to be the way you want it.
Feedback loops other than the horse on your wrist. I've got a curious. Maybe you've been asked this before, Doc, or maybe not. I don't mind being the first one to ask you, and it's a pointed question. It might put you off a little bit, but I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to create discomfort for you when I ask this question. Is there something for you that you've noted over the years of working with either veterans? Yeah, let's just stick with veterans, where you can form a pattern as to this guy's not going to make it. He's not going to make it in therapy. Or maybe you've had 3 or 4 or 10 failures with veterans where you realize the pattern within yourself. Oh, I'm not the guy. I've got to pass this person on to a colleague. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's a big question, maybe bigger than you think it was.
I'm sorry.
No, it's an interesting question because one of the comments I make again to the students is if you're looking for closure in this profession, you're going to have a problem. Because you're not going to get closure all the time. You're going to have their clients who are just going to leave. They're not going to tell you whether they got better or they got worse. Sometimes you'll get them to tell you they got better. I've had clients 4 years later that tell me, you helped me so much, and I had no idea because they just left and
That's
never returned my
fantastic.
call. So I don't know. Other clients, do I think that? No, it depends on the psychiatric disorder, obviously, and depends on their commitment levels. And we're only a human being, like I tell people, you only have 1 hour a week with this individual. They got 167 hours. They're going to have to deal with whatever they got going. That's a long time. You have to fight through stuff, and hopefully you'll give them, because we can only give them the skill sets. And this is something for everybody out there who's listening, who will listen. How do you define success for good mental health? How do you define success in that therapy session? It isn't like you're never going to be sad again. It isn't like you're never going to be anxious again. But can you deal with it the next time? Can you deal with it better than you're dealing with it today? That's really the only thing I can see as being successful. Do you have a skill set now that's better? As a soft guy, you're not going to win every battle. You'll win a lot of battles. And if you're still here, you won every battle in the sense that you're here. But you have certain skill sets that makes you better each and every time that you go out there. Every battle makes you sharper. You look back at the things, like everybody I talk to, the soft community, every time they have a battle, a gun battle, whatever it is, they learn from it. And it makes them better to go out the next time if they have to encounter something. They realize, okay, I couldn't do this because last time I didn't do this. A Green Beret told me he took somebody, they were fighting and they went to the ground, they got on their back, and he realized jiu-jitsu wasn't the game for him. This situation. It's not good to be on my back with this guy on top of me and I have weapons on my vest. This isn't going to be helpful. So he kind of figured that out. But those are things that you learn over time. So I don't know if you can ever predict, because we're not in the game of predicting who's going to do better or worse, or have I tossed people out or said, no, I don't think we can work together. There's been a couple where I thought they might be better off with somebody else. There's been a couple where I knew I wasn't ready for it. This is early on in my career where I thought,
that's good.
Yeah, because I had a situation with them because it was a 7 or 8 year old that was sexually molested by her uncle. And that was just something couldn't deal with at that time. Can I deal with it today? Yeah. At that time, no.
Knowing your limits is important, particularly as a professional trying to understand another human's limits.
I always tell people, if you're working with individuals with trauma and Shaun tells me something and I go, oh my God, whew, how do I,
right.
And you start getting more reactive than they are, that's not going to help the situation. So if you have the issues,
you're fired.
Yeah. You have issues you have to deal with. If you can't handle that, step aside and let somebody else do it. Because again, you're doing nobody any favors, and you're actually probably hurting yourself at the same time because you haven't reconciled that issue that you have.
But the trick is, of course, you finding the right balance in that moment, and I'm using you specifically, even though I'm referring to the entire industry, is finding the right balance in that moment to respond rather than just keep just a little bit more than an arm's distance from the entire thing that's going on in the moment. Impassionately or dispassionately or disconnected from the moment doesn't help the moment. You've got to be connected as the professional so that there's some form of tangible empathy rather than a professional shield between the two of you. Overreaction is not cool, but underreaction is not cool.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And you have to gauge that, and that takes practice and time, and you have to learn. Yeah, and you have to learn your client and see how they're responding to it. Because if your client starts starts comforting you, you've gone overboard.
Unless it's a new strategy.
some things have gone wrong at that point, I think. Satch, good morning. Good to see you. Glad you were able to join us. It was interesting. I had a thought about this, is the fact that, Shaun and I talked a little while ago about the excuse of external proxy and the drive to like want to work. So after when I got out of the military and I was like, I want to do something, I started getting into advocacy, and I started working with other people, trying to like help them, as I thought I was good to go, even though I was not in any way.
Needing the most help.
Right? Exactly. And
but I think everyone goes through that, no?
I think so, yeah. And the tool or the lesson that I learned in that was the fact that boundaries have to be upheld. Right. And there's going to be a point in time where I can't help somebody when they call me at 2:00 in the morning, and I have to be able to go, I can't do anything for you right now. You got to call this guy or call this number or talk to that person or whatever, because I'm not going to be any help to you. I'm in the hurt locker myself. Not a good time to chat. But at the same time, I'm always going to answer that phone regardless. So it is a weird balancing act, but it is something that we eventually learn, is to set those boundaries and make sure that they're rigidly adhered to. Maybe not rigidly, but adhered to.
That's a great point.
Same for
therapists have the same issues too, because they burn out.
Yeah.
They try to, especially if you're dealing with individuals with trauma, severe trauma, child abuse, things of that nature, becomes very difficult because you're taking in a lot. And if you're not taking care of yourself in other ways, it can be a problem. Your other comment about stopping, that's been a big one for a lot of the military, especially for soft guys, is when they're going 150 miles an hour to slam it to zero at a stoplight, all of a sudden just try to adjust. It's not a very easy thing to do. And they've been identified as a certain type of person. They live a certain type of way. And now everything is just, there's no easing out process. It's just over. And it's just kind of a weird scenario, And I get it. It's a difficult situation. Because what do? Cops have it. Baseball players, pro basketball players, they're done. I remember I was blessed enough to interview Larry Holmes. And I asked him, what's the toughest thing been for you for retirement? He goes, nobody calls me anymore. And I said, oh, and I didn't expect that from him. But he's like, yeah, I mean, nobody cares anymore about what my opinions are. Nobody cares about what I do anymore. And again, it's the identity of the job, right? Whatever job you have, if you're really locked onto it, then sure, it's hard. You feel there's a loss that happens, just like a loss of a human being, loss of a job, all that's connected. And it takes time to find who the new Chance is, or whoever the new person is, and then move along from there. But for therapists, I think it's tough because they can get overwhelmed pretty quickly too if you're dealing with a tough population.
Now that you've said that, I'm curious. I've never thought it before. Do therapists have therapists?
They're advised to. Yeah, they're advised to always. I always advise them to do the same thing. If you got somebody who's, something that resembles your past, something that triggers something in you, go talk to somebody to get that out of there. It's a very tough field. There's no doubt about it. And Chance's comment about being on the phone, he's got a similar taste to it. That's kind of what the feeling is sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. So
is there an inception level of therapists? So like a therapist looking after a therapist who's looking after a therapist. The movie Inception. We're 3 layers deep now, baby.
There can be. It just depends on also the awareness of the therapist. If they really believe they're having issues, do they need to talk to anybody? They get the same mindset a lot of other people do. Am I good enough for this job? Can I do it? Maybe I'm too weak. Maybe I shouldn't do it.
Right.
So it just depends on the context.
We got a pointed question here before. I know there's like not a lot of time before we go, but I think we'll stretch it just a little bit for this question because I think it's a good one. Carl says, I have a pointed question. How do you know if you've done enough as a friend, colleague, therapist, etc., even if there is a loss? Right? Yeah. That makes sense. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a good question. It's a tough question again. So you're right. A lot of pointed stuff coming at me today, but that's good. Really, it depends on how you feel about what you did. Did you feel like you did everything you could? And that's also dangerous to go down that route. You have to be careful because there's always something we could do more, we could do better. So you can't. But did you feel like you did enough at that time? You can't. Like I tell sometimes the therapist, you have to remember they're going to make decisions regardless of what you said or didn't say to them. They're going to make decisions on their own. And some of those decisions aren't good. And some of those decisions are good. Did you give it your best when you were there? I've seen people who have friends who they thought they did everything for them. They picked up the phone, as Chance mentioned. They went to their home. They did what they did. And then 2 weeks later, they still commit suicide. And they blame themselves. Could I have done more? Again, that's something you can never answer. And it's something you can't answer. And you can't put yourself on that. You can't blame yourself for that. You have to understand, did you do the best you could at the time? Mm-hmm. Because remember, and people forget this, and I think sometimes people think they have more power than they do sometimes, but there's 168 hours a week. Chance can't be there with anybody for 160, neither can I. Nobody can. So if you're talking to somebody for 5 hours in a week, who knows what the next thought was 5 hours later for that person? Who knows if something triggered something? Did you do the best as you can as a friend?
Yeah.
Right? And it's a judging game. Shaun made the point, we don't get a manual of how to be human beings. And every human's different. Everybody responds differently. Some people you can push a little bit. Maybe Chance couldn't have been pushed with that current therapist 2 years before.
Yeah.
Maybe he was ready to be pushed now. How are you going to know? So a lot of it, unfortunately, is trial and error. Hopefully that answers the question. It's kind of difficult because I know a lot of therapists will blame themselves. Oh, crap. I could have done more. I could have said more. Maybe you could have. Maybe you couldn't have. But you learn from it.
You know, Shaun, I think you got a mug in front of you that has something on it that might have something to do with that. What do we got here?
Oh, they go the other way.
Here's what I like to tell all the therapists out there. I'm just saying.
That's really it. That's really it.
Yeah. So we're just over an hour now. Thanks, Carlos, man. I really appreciate it, Doc. This has been a great conversation. Didn't go down the road I thought it was going to go down, but it works. It's a groovy conversation. I really had a blast. Any final thoughts? Anything we've gone over today that rattle around in the big old brain of yours?
Honestly, if you're looking to try to connect, I think getting the Dale Carnegie book is great. If you're struggling with something, obviously get help, whether it's mental health or some other way, whether it's exercise, meditation, support groups, whatever it is, look for alternatives. If one thing doesn't work, don't ever give up. If you're a soft guy, you know that in your heart, you don't give up. So that's my final words on that.
I like it. I like it a lot. Shaun, any final thoughts before we shut her down?
Yeah, thanks for showing up and bringing the heat, Doc, as now becoming the trend.
Mm-hmm.
So really appreciate that. Love the conversation. Learned a few things along the way, which is awesome. And I'm sure that anyone who's listening to this learned a bunch of things as well. So really enjoy your knowledge base today.
Yeah, really do appreciate you showing you being here and being cool with the timing adjustments as things were like flying left, right, and center. It worked out quite well, and I think that we definitely have. I know I've learned some stuff. I know, well, Shaun's learned some stuff. I'm sure you've learned some stuff. I'm sure everybody watching has learned some stuff. But the key point about it is not just learning; it's about putting it into action. It's about actually utilizing the information that you just brought in to help you build into be a better, stronger, faster human being. And that way you can continue to grow every day. And you can do that with us here on The Collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Chimo.